Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome first timers. We've been doing the living between two worlds talk now for, I don't know, 7 or 8 weeks or so. And Joel's Portland tape with that title, I was listening to that the other night, and it reminded me we get in the habit of, we talk about living between two worlds, we talk about my kingdom, and we talk about this world, and we talk about big I, and we talk about little I, and the concern is that we start thinking that there are such things, that there is this world, or there is a my kingdom, external, physical, material, exists type worlds. Or that there is a little I, or that there really is something that can be called a big I, and none of that is true. So I went back to the 2 axioms that most of the work we do here are based on, and thought I'd come from that side, and then we'd look at my kingdom again. This world is entirely in your mind, and little I is entirely in your mind, and it would be good if we could get to see that tonight. So the basic axiom that this work is based on is that God is consciousness, expressing itself as our individual consciousness. That's the basic axiom that this metaphysical/mystical work is based on. And the second axiom, that's equally important for the work we do here, says that our experience is the outpicturing of the content of our consciousness. Or just in general, that experience is the outpicturing of the content of consciousness. And we can dwell a bit on what that means. Consciousness what mind is the, I don't know what you call it, aspect of consciousness, or the tool that consciousness uses, or whatever you want to say. It's the aspect of consciousness in which the content of consciousness outpictures. Mind is the holograph. Mind is the tool that the content of consciousness outpictures in. So there's consciousness, and within consciousness is this thing called mind that contains the outpicturing of the content of consciousness. And the real, quotes on both sides of that word, universe, is the outpicturing in mind of God's concept of all, of everything. Okay? Now there's no mind without content, and there's no content without mind. They really are sort of a unit, like everything is one. But we can look at the, so to speak, real universe as the outpicturing of the content of God's consciousness in mind. And that would include God's concept of us as individual consciousnesses. So there's a God concept of that too, probably. Remember, of course, this is all just a way of thinking about this that I have found fruitful. Now, there's only one mind. It's an aspect of the one consciousness. So there's really only one mind that we're all part of. And there's also what we call human consciousness. And there's one human consciousness. And human consciousness, the one human consciousness, is really the aggregate of all the individual human consciousnesses. It's no more and no less. It's just all the human consciousnesses make up the human, what we call human consciousness. So we're all a part of that to the extent that we're in human consciousness. Now you notice that we haven't mentioned matter here anywhere. We're talking about consciousness and mind, and there's nothing in this anywhere that's any more real than what's happening inside your head in a dream. And we aren't going to ever talk about anything more real than what goes on inside your head in the middle of the night when you have a dream, because all there is consciousness. God is consciousness, and God is all there is, and anything that God made, it had to make out of consciousness or in consciousness or within consciousness, or however you want to put that. So when we talk about God creating the universe, what we mean is that God had an aspect about it that is mind, and He's outpictured in mind, whatever its concepts are, whatever it's doing. Now, what human consciousness sees is the outpicturing of the content of human consciousness. And remember, human consciousness, everything is born ignorant, so human consciousness was born ignorant. So human consciousness started very far from God consciousness, and human consciousness sees the outpicturing of the content of its consciousness, and what that is its concepts about God's concepts. Its concepts about the universe. In other words, God's concepts are outpictured in the universe, and what we see is not God's concepts of the universe. What we see is our concept about God's concept expressed out there in the universe. So, what human consciousness believes is what it sees, is the way it sees God consciousness. And this, of course, is the explanation for why we see all the wars and pestilence and SARS and humanity to man and evil and disease and pestilence and plagues and all that stuff. This is the human concept about God's concept about that universe. And of course, what we individually experience is our concept of the human concept, or our concept of God concept. See, now we suddenly have what appears to be some autonomy here, because to the extent that we are focused on human consciousness, we're seeing the human picture, the human concept of the universe, and to the extent that we're tuned into God consciousness, we're seeing God's concept of the universe. Okay? So, and here is where we have the first place that we have any dominion. And we have it only when we have it until the first moment that we learn that we can exercise it. We don't exercise it, and we don't know that we can. You know, it's a choice once you know it's a choice, is what I'm saying, but until you know it's a choice, it wasn't. But we can decide whether or not we're going to listen to human consciousness or listen to God consciousness. And we can decide how much of human consciousness we let into our individual consciousness and how much of God consciousness we seek as to let into our consciousness. And of course, as we control the content of our individual consciousness in this way, our interpretation changes out there from a picture which is mostly in agreement with the human consciousness to a picture which is much more in agreement with the God consciousness. Now, since we're seeing it all the time, we're talking about seeing it, we're talking about seeing it with our body and our mind, our body, our mind. We're seeing what, we're dealing with the 5 human senses when we're talking about what we see. And so what we see appears to be spiritual. Appears to be material. Because we think we're material, and we think we have material senses, and we think the material senses are seeing material things. But understand that the physical body that you think you are is in your mind, is in consciousness, and therefore can't possibly be material. All you know of your mind is all you know of your body is what you're conscious of, which is to say, all you know of your body is within your consciousness, and the content of consciousness is not matter, the content of consciousness is spirit. So it looks material to us, but that's because we think we're a physical body with a mind. In fact, we're a spiritual being, and consciousness, and in that consciousness is the mind, and in the mind is this body and these 5 physical senses. So they're only going to see what's expected to be seen by our concept of what our body is. It's like the universe is God's body, and consciousness expressing in mind, you could call that a body. That's the only concept of body there is. So you could call the real, in quotes again, universe to be God's body, the expression and content of God's consciousness, and your expression of your concept of yourself is what we call your body, but it's just your concept of yourself. And again, it reflects the extent to which you're attuned to God consciousness or the extent to which you're attuned to human consciousness. You're either at the vagaries of the insurance company's statistical tables, or you don't have the power to heal. Now, dominion, it says in the Bible, and this is where Joel got jumped off, it says very early in the Bible somewhere that God created all that is, and He gave us dominion over everything between heaven and the bottom of the sea. And that does not mean that we're tiger tamers, or lion tamers, or things like that. It doesn't mean that it's not talking about a material world. What that dominion means is that we have dominion over what we see, in the sense that we have control over whether we accept the human consciousness lies into our consciousness, or whether we accept the God consciousness truths into our consciousness. You have a lot of control over the appearance of your own body based on your concept of it. You have more control than anybody else does over it. You have some dominion over the appearance of the universe to you, the appearance of the people in your life, how the people that come into your life behave, or what the affluence appears to be, or the aspects of the people that come into your experience. You have some dominion over that, but I don't have dominion over the appearance of your body. I individually, Lee, don't have dominion over the appearance of your body unless you've come to me for a spiritual healing and have essentially turned over your dominion to me. And then to the extent that you're not maintaining yourself, that healing can happen. So we have some dominion over what we see, but there are some things that we have absolutely no dominion over, like what time the sun's going to come up tomorrow. If all the saints in the world got together tonight and meditated and prayed and lifted themselves as high as they could, they're not going to make the sun come up 1 minute earlier or 1 minute later. And this is because we don't have dominion over God's law. And this is where you get the idea of what law is. There are some things that are immutable that we, as human consciousness, have no control over. And like we won't be able to make apples grow on orange trees, as Joel loves to point out. So there are some underlying laws of the universe that we have no control over. But it's amazing how much we really do have dominion over things if we choose it. So now let's go back to living between two worlds. I want to hit on a couple of things that Joel was talking about. This world is all in your mind. And my kingdom is what you see in this world is your concept of my kingdom. Okay? And little I is all in your mind. And little I, with its mind and its body, is your concept of big I in the sense of your individual big I. Now we're back to God is consciousness expressing as individual consciousness. That individual consciousness is what I'm talking about as big I. We have three I's. We have little I, we have big I, and then we have I am. And when I say I am, think all the caps, and that's a bigger I, okay? But little I is your concept of big I. And so the extent to which you're in divine consciousness is the extent to which you're aware of your big I and attuned to that and having that experience. Now, let's take one thing. If this world is all in your mind, then you can't be a victim. You see, you can't be victimized, and you can't be at their mercy, and you can't be at the mercy of the vagaries of politics or epidemic or stock market crashes or hurricanes or tidal waves. You see, you can't possibly be a victim of any of those or at the mercy of any of those because they're all in your mind. Okay? Now, the content of your mind, if you're not taking care of it, is the content of human consciousness, and in the content of human consciousness, there are all those things that I just mentioned. But if you are in my kingdom, i.e. in big I, then you can look at this news and say, no, that's not truth. I'm not at the mercy of politics or terrorists or tidal waves. That's not possible. There's no such thing. That's all just in mind. It has no reality. I don't need to worry about that. God's kingdom is harmonious. So you can, if you remember, to get back into big I, confront all these things which we tend to feel victimized by otherwise by knowing the truth, which of course is why we study the letter of truth. mind, which is also why we get into a regular meditation practice, because that gives us the muscle and remembrance to go back and remember the truth. Now, one other thing I want to say, if I'm in big I, and I'm not being victimized by anything out there, then all I can see is your big I, regardless of your behavior. Okay? If I'm seeing your little I, I'm in little I. Okay? So, how holy I am is not determined by how holy I act. If I think Saddam Hussein is evil, I'm in little I. I just pull myself right back out of my holy big I into little I. If I think there existed an evil Hitler, I'm in little I. So, like we said last week, when you see any sort of lack or limitation or anything like that, it's a trigger to remind you that you're in little I and you need to get back to big I. Similarly, if you see any one who is evil or foolish or bad or drunk or a thief or a couple of cards short in their deck or a half a bubble off or totally had their bell rung and, or wet brains. If you see a wet brain, you're in little I, that's not there. What we want to do as part of the discipline of moving from this world into my kingdom is to use any appearance of a person that is anything other than perfect, to remind us that we're slipping out of big I and into little I. And I will say that if you are in big I, if you have developed some practice of being in big I so that that is becoming your being, then every person who comes to you, regardless of their appearance, is coming to you in order that you can recognize their big I in them. That's why they come to you when you have the experience. When you are in big I, that's what it means to be ordained in the real sense of the word. That's the sense that in churches they talk about, that when you are ordained, when the Spirit of God is upon you, when you are in big I consciousness, then the reason people come to you is to get their big I recognized and lifted up. And some come to you as a teacher so that you can put the polishing touches on them. And some come to you a half a bubble off, a few cards short in the deck, or with a wet brain, so that you can see and know the truth about them. And if you can, the appearance can't last. That's the basis of all healing work. That's the crux of all healing work, and we're talking about healing in not only disease, but lack and employment and companionship and everything else. If you cannot see anything other than perfection and harmony in someone else, regardless of what appearance they're presenting to you, then you are a healer. And then you are a benediction wherever you go. And that's pretty far on the transition from living in this world to living in my kingdom. See, when you're doing that, then you are truly in this world, but not of it. You're not being touched by the appearances. You see what other people see, and you say, oh, that's the appearance. That guy's got a really sad concept about himself, and humanity's concept is really backing him up, but I know what's there. and you know the truth. And then it may take a minute or an hour or a day or a week or a year before the appearance breaks, depending on how hard that person is clinging to it, but it will break. So the point is that you're in my kingdom only to the extent to which you're seeing my kingdom. And every other appearance, if it's accepted as a appearance, a temptation, is fine. You're still in my kingdom. But if you think it's real, you just dropped out. Okay? Questions?
You said you have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I did you. I wasn't doing you, but I was just doing because it's like if I'm really in a there is no, if I'm in human consciousness and someone's in God consciousness, and I go up to them and I say, you're not really in human consciousness right now, they go, well, you have a choice whether you want to be in human consciousness or not.
No, that's not what they do if they're in God consciousness.
If they're in God consciousness, they go, oh, well.
And no, what they do is they see you as who you are and lift you out of it by doing that. If they're in God consciousness, they will know that you're coming to them to be lifted, to have their real eye seen, and they will see it, and it will lift you out to the extent that you're available to being lifted out of it.
If somebody is in the kingdom and seeing with their big eye, and somebody, let's say for example, is a wet brain, and human consciousness sees them like that, but somebody who has that brain does not see them that way, they see them as they truly are, let's say a spiritual being.
Yeah.
Why is there ever a need for any healing if that's their true nature? And why is it important that they come back to what human consciousness would rather them be?
It's not important.
Then why did Joel do all the healing, and why did you, I think you said that they will eventually come out of it if...
They will, and as far as, there are two levels. First of all, let me suggest that the real reason Joel did so much healing was it's a great carrot. He heals people a few times and they say, how did you do that? What is your consciousness? What's there about that? And they come to him and become a student and start learning the truth. And the result of Joel's phenomenal ability to be healed was a student body of 50,000 people who he was lifting in consciousness through his yearly work, raising all of human consciousness.
To Joel, they were never sick anyway.
If he thought they were sick, he could not have healed them.
Right.
That's the whole point. See, Joel never saw a sick person. If he thought they were sick, they would have stayed sick. So Joel had no sick people coming to him, and Joel did no healing.
But he could see the truth, but at the same time, he could understand what human consciousness was seeing. So he could say,
the picture.
I understand why you think you're crippled. Okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, he sees the picture that they bring him and knows the truth, or sees the picture they're complaining about. Somebody calls up and says, I got tuberculosis. He says, leave it with me. He doesn't say, no, you don't. He says, leave it with me. And goes into consciousness, laughing about the person who thinks they have tuberculosis, knowing that only God is there, or doing whatever he does along those lines, but knowing that God just called him to see if he was willing to buy tuberculosis or not.
So it was more just kind of like marketing work to get, I don't mean that like...
No, I mean, yeah, that's what I meant by it's a carrot. The fact is it was a very useful carrot.
Well,
It also, just to finish up that point, it also wasn't Joel's plan to do that. Joel had his enlightenment experience, and 2 days later, some lady comes up and taps him on the shoulder and says, "Pray for me." And Joel looks at her and says, "Why?" And she says, "I'm sick, and if you pray for me, I'll get well." And Joel has no idea that his spiritual experience 2 days ago has done anything that's changing like that. I mean, he knows a whole lot of truth now and has a whole different concept of everything, but he doesn't know he's a healer. And he says, it's on a tape somewhere, he says, "So I thought to myself, well, I don't know any prayers," And so he closed his eyes and says, "Well, God, I don't know what it is I'm supposed to do right now." And he starts like that, and she taps him on the shoulder and says, "Thank you." Okay? And she's had a healing. And so, this wasn't Joel's plan to heal either. It also wasn't Joel's plan to have 50,000 students and teach. What he wanted to do is sit in Hawaii and be quiet and what he wanted to do is sit and bliss, but he had to wander around the world teaching.
One other question I have is...
Let me hear what John has to say first.
Well, it had to do with the thing like she has tuberculosis, but because Joel had glasses and Robert had Parkinson's, but that's not even our body. It doesn't even exist. So what does it matter what disease it has? It's got all.
If you're in the consciousness where it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter.
Okay.
In fact, Joel's comment on that was, "Well, I could probably heal glasses. He says sight's hard.
Right.
Bones and teeth and sight is hard." He said, "I could probably heal my sight if I went away into meditation for 3 or 4 days and just worked on it and worked on it and worked on it and worked on it and worked on it." He said, "I could probably break it." He said, but during those 4 days, the 135 people a day that call him for healing wouldn't get healed, and he saw no reason to do it. So he just didn't bother. And Robert did not have Parkinson's disease.
Right.
His body did.
That's my...
According to the people around him, his body did. But Robert had no idea that that was his body. So the whole question doesn't even arise in Robert's case. In Joel's case, he addressed it. He knew he couldn't see, and he didn't bother to heal it because it often took Joel several times to heal. The first encounter he had with something, the first tuberculosis took him 6 months. And the first cancer, he had 27 cancer patients that he was working on simultaneously before he broke cancer. And when he broke it, he broke all 27 the same day. He had a moment of clarity in which it said to him, "How many patients do you have?" And Joel thought 27, and then he thought, "None. Only God is here." And he walked out into his waiting room, and there were a bunch of healthy people, and all the ones that weren't on schedule, that they called him and told him that they had so that's how it works. It's all a Leelaa anyway. And the fact is that you're already absolutely enlightened in pure consciousness, and none of this exists. The big I doesn't exist either in any real sense. All there really is the consciousness way back behind the whole thing. Or not even, let me say, the awareness behind the consciousness that we call God. You had a follow-up question?
Yeah, maybe it's a little off from that, but a lot of the Robert that I've been listening to, I've heard him say several times that, everything is preordained, and, and then that leaves me a little confused about my job on the spiritual journey, or the so-called work to be done. That once I understand, I have a choice between shutting off human consciousness and focusing on God's consciousness. If it's, I don't know, I'm a little confused between I have the power to take that direction, and it's all preordained, and I'm powerless anyway.
Yeah, and the problem there is all the levels that are involved in that. it's difficult to address that. He does say that you have the power to go within or not. He says the one freedom you have is the choice of whether to react or whether to go within. Okay? And going within essentially means turning yourself over to God consciousness rather than the human consciousness. And that must out picture. So that is the one choice you have. The real point, though, is that the one who has that choice is already the big I. Little I doesn't have that choice. The human consciousness doesn't have that choice. Before you can have the choice to go within, you have to have some spiritual adult presence. So the big I, the spiritual being, is the one that's exercising some choice, okay? And the physical, the human being, the little I, the material concept, doesn't have any choice at all. That's all totally determined. And another way of looking at it is the little I, the material, the body-mind phenomenon, doesn't even exist. That's not real. That's a false concept about the big I. So how the hell can the false concept about something have free will, have a choice, exercise a choice? So you see that what we're asking about whether or not it has a choice doesn't exist. And that's where the problem of predetermination really stems. It's like, so you're walking along and I've hypnotized you to think there's a white poodle behind you, okay? And I say, look behind you, there's a white poodle, and you look back and see it, and I say, watch it jump, and you see it jump. And I snap my fingers, and you're out of the hypnotization, and you're back into this reality. And I asked you, did you see the poodle jump? And you say, yes. And I ask you, did the poodle jump? First of all, then I can ask you, did a poodle really jump? And the answer is no, there wasn't. I mean, you saw the poodle jump, but there was no poodle there. And then I can ask you the question, did that poodle jump of free will, or was the jumping determined? And who cares? There was no poodle. You see? You see the problem? And this I that you're asking about whether it has free will or not is that poodle. It's purely the product of hypnotization. It's the concept. And, so it gets rather academic. Yeah.
I'm having difficulty with a law and not a law.
Mm-hmm.
I have no power over the sunrise, but I have power over human disease. I don't.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You have power over those things which are human concepts about God's universe, but you do not have power over God's universe.
But isn't that an outpicturing of my consciousness, the whole universe?
The universe that you see is the outpicturing of your concept about God's universe. Okay? And what your concept of God's universe is God's universe, except filtered through a glass darkly into the human consciousness concept about God's universe, filtered again through a glass darkly by your concept about that concept, okay? So what you're seeing is your concept. Now, if your concept was about when the sun would come up with something totally different than what happens, you could correct it, but the fact is that what we're seeing is the human outpicturing of God's law of the way planets and things work.
But then it looks to me like size makes it different, because if I were to look into a microscope at a whole other universe and have control over that universe, because that's the universe in which a disease or something was happening.
No, you don't have control over that either. The point is that there is no disease.
That part I have no trouble with. Like if I stay with Robert, I'm okay. It's the going.
There is no disease. And that's why you have control over the apparent effect of disease, because there is no such thing. There is no, disease has no power.
But then it seems that size is relative.
No.
Because disease is small, but it's still, all those atoms.
Yeah, I understand that's your concept, but the size is not the relevant thing. The relevant thing is whether or not it's a concept of or the original.
How do I tell the difference?
See whether you can change it. Joel controlled hurricanes. Does that put a different sense to it? I mean, it's not little tiny stuff. During the 14 or 12 years that Joel lived in Hawaii, no hurricane touched Hawaii. And then Joel died, and hurricanes started happening again. The yearly hurricane or two that came through hit it, and before he lived there, the yearly hurricane came through, and during all the time that Joel lived in Hawaii, no hurricane touched Hawaii, because Joel was really clear that there was no such thing as harmony, as disharmony. He says God's law is harmony. That looks disharmonious. To me, that's not true. So he had a bunch of people that actually consciously worked on hurricanes successfully. That big enough? But Joel didn't work on his glasses or sunrises.
Because I understand, Robert's concept that it doesn't matter anyway. I mean, I'm not here anyway, so I can just,
sure.
It's all perfect.
And that, of course, is the highest way, as long as it's truthful. If it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter.
There's actually a line in the Bible. I don't know whether Jesus said it or just some dude wrote it, but it says, it talks about the flowers in the field, and aren't they beautiful? And the pink and the birds, and they'll be fed. And then he says, do you actually think you could add 1 second to your life?
Or 1 cubit to your height. Yeah,
right.
That was Jesus.
That was Jesus.
Yeah, it was.
And that kind of...
Who by taking thought can add 1 cubit to their height?
Right.
Any event. No, there's no way for you to know. I mean, there's no way for you to know right out front for sure what are laws and what aren't, but there are some things that are pretty clearly laws. Like begets like is one that Joel likes to talk about, and the mathematical precision with which planets and things like that seem to work. But once again, let me remind you that, as Robert would, that all of this is in the mind. And all we're discussing is who put it there. Are you looking at what God put in mind, or are you looking at the human concept of what God put in mind, or are you looking at your concept, which is presumably a conglomerate between the two?
And that separateness.
That whole thing is separateness, yeah.
I can understand separateness.
Mind implies separateness. The minute you introduce mind, you have time and space and separateness. But mind is just within consciousness.
In fact, the concept of separateness doesn't have, you can't.
If you can really see that the concept of separateness is impossible, then you should be teaching this class.
I mean, just cognitively it's not, it doesn't make any sense. They can't be. How can they be?
If that's what you see, then fine, you're done. Congratulations.
Can't act on it.
Ah,
But can't conceptualize anything differently.
who can't conceptualize something differently?
The small I.
See? So there's separateness. And now you're telling me there is separateness.
Because but there can't be. That's the intellectual dilemma.
It's not intellectual. That's the problem. If there's not separateness, there can't be an intellectual dilemma. Because separateness would...
Can't be separateness.
That's true. There can't. There can't. That's the truth. But if you're there, then none of this makes any sense. Then there can't even be mind.
Right.
In the Tao Te Ching, it says first there were one, then there were two, then there were the 10,000 things. Okay? So there's the absolute, pure awareness, okay? One. Alright? Then the pure awareness I don't know, there's no possible word to say, but let's say arouses itself. And there's consciousness, too. Okay? And the next number is 10,000. Space and time and objects and distance between them and separateness and good and bad and up and down and all that stuff. Okay? And even consciousness is a lie. Awareness is the truth. And that awareness is who you are. And when you're sitting there, then you're right, separateness is impossible. Sean, please.
On the, this is going to sound lame, but it just hit me. Awareness is God. I'm just saying in a Christian context. Like awareness is like would be God, and then consciousness is the breath of God, and then the 10,000 is the 7 days of, creation, kind of. So I'm trying to understand. The little I is me to be human. The big I is consciousness, and I am is awareness.
Well,
In a context.
you're redefining the words. That's not the way I use them.
But it's just in a context.
That's not the way I use them, so I don't know whether what you're hearing about.
How did you use them?
I use awareness as the pure awareness that is beyond everything,
Correct.
which is neither conscious nor unconscious. Okay? Because those are words. So there is awareness, and within awareness occurs consciousness. Okay? And consciousness is God.
Okay.
And consciousness, God creates. This is mind, and this is the 7 days. 7 days of the creation in mind is what we call it, okay? And, but God is not only God is not only manifesting stuff in mind, so to speak, but it's also expressing His individual consciousness. Now, those individual consciousnesses are what I call big I. The God expressed as your individual consciousness is your big I. Okay, and it's one with God. There's no separateness. It has all of God there. It's omnipotent, and omnipresent, and omni-everything, and all of that stuff is there, and it's harmonious and blissful and all that. But that's what I call the big I. And the concept that big I, that aspect of God, can outpicture in mind just like God did. And that aspect, and what it outpictures in mind is its concept of itself. So the reflection of big I is little I. Little I is the reflection in mind of big I. And you can't draw, none of these words are right, and none of these terms are right, and we're drawing these pictures in our mind, and the lines can't possibly get drawn at the right place, and there are aspects, if you draw the picture that way, there are things in big I that belong in little I, and things that belong in the up top I, but that's about as useful a way as I've found of thinking about it, so that we can sort of have a vocabulary, which is, of course, pure nonsense.
Mm-hmm. I'm getting sorry to backtrack, but I got lost on something. And
Very good. You're following this. I'm worried.
You're talking about Joel,
Uh-huh.
and you said he didn't have control over the sun.
He didn't what?
He didn't have control over the sun, or power. Excuse me. That's the word. Power over the sun. Didn't have power over him. He had his glasses, but yet he had power over a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very.
He had power over his using glasses. He didn't choose to exercise that.
Okay. So if he decided he didn't need glasses, or
If he decided that he didn't want glasses, like I say, when he first tried to heal something, it often took him a significant period of time, and he would take the first case of something, and he would take him some time, and he would get a pot of coffee and go off somewhere in the woods and meditate for a day and do stuff like that, and grind and grind and grind and grind and grind until he broke it, because he had to break it's like he was trying to break down human consciousness. That's why he traveled all around the world. He was looking at human consciousness, and he had to like break down human consciousness. He had to teach human consciousness that there's no colon cancer either. I know we only done lung cancer, but by God, there's no colon cancer either. He had to break down the colon cancer is real thought or something, So he had to break it down, and he just never was willing to spend the time on himself to break down his own glasses. I don't know whether he may have done site work on other people, I don't know. He wasn't willing to spend that time because he thought it might take him 3 or 4 days.
It sounds like breakdown required a lot of work. It sounds like effort, which I sometimes get the impression that this really shouldn't be effort. Just a matter of awareness. But it's just, like, breaking down...
As long as we're talking about a picture in one mind that we're all looking at, there's a lot of there's a lot of power that human consciousness has, and it matters whether his consciousness of that is clearer and how much. I don't know what all the variables are, and Jesus might have done it quicker.
Yeah.
But Jesus probably didn't have a 100% healing record either. And Joel only healed like 85%. There are other things than just his clarity, but I'm sure that Joel never for a second thought that there was an imperfection there. But he saw the imperfection in the picture and didn't spend time trying to get rid of that particular imperfection. What did you have, Anne?
Which is that didn't Joel have 2 experiences with healing? Like he initially wasn't he a healer who saw a dysfunction, a condition or whatever, but later, and it takes later, if you'll say it's a disadvantage to even know the name of the condition that anybody wants you to work on. That's like to your disadvantage. You just don't want to even know that. So we have 2 periods of, later just knowing the truth. First he was into conditions being needing to be fixed.
Well, he had a Christian Science background. He was a healer in the Christian Science church for quite a while. And the Christian Science church, was even so wrong at one time as to have a list of the error in the mind that produced a particular physical dysfunction. And I have no idea at what point it became clear to Joel that, his principle of impersonalization. But that became his first healing principle, his impersonalization, which was to forget who claimed the problem and forget what the specific problem was, although he didn't ever forget completely there. He liked to know the arena of the problem because, he also commented on you need to bring the specific truth to bear to counteract the problem. He said you don't bring the truth that 4 plus 4 is 8 to a person to correct the error that 2 times 3 is 5. 4 plus 4 is 8 does not correct 2 times 3 is 5. 2 times 3 is 6. That specific truth, when demonstrated, will correct 2 times 3 is 5. So what he was saying is that, he doesn't use the same. The truth that he brings to mind is not just a big global general truth, it's a specific truth that applies to the problem, so that he would not solve a lack of supply the same way as he would solve the lack of employment, or the same way as he would solve cancer. So he was specific to some extent.
So it's more like asking to know what's the truth about cancer versus asking to know the truth. It's just...
Yeah, but then towards the end, he was so high that he didn't ask anything. He always knew it was impossible. And he also talks about cases, one case I hear on the tape is where he got a telegram and a letter the same day in Hawaii. And somebody had sent a telegram to Los Angeles asking him for a healing. And he was not in Los Angeles, and so they took the telegram and put it in an envelope and mailed it to him. And meanwhile, the person received the healing and dropped a check in another envelope and sent it to Hawaii, because by now they found out that he was in Hawaii, and sent that to him, so he got the request for help and the thanks for help and the check in the same mail. And see, in this case, what they've done is come in contact with this absolute consciousness that knew there couldn't possibly be any problem at all, and knew that, that only God was coming to him for help, and so there was nothing he needed to do. And this denies the whole idea of even needing to bring a specific truth, because here he had no idea that there even was a call for help, and he healed. Mm-hmm.
So is that why in some cases it's just sufficient to say the name of the person, like to ask to have the consciousness of Joel or Robert, or when they talk about the mind that was in, when Joel talks about the mind that was in Christ Jesus, it's that the mind that knows the consciousness that knows the truth.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be if you were always where Joel was at the end, chances are that you'd have an amazing success in healing, and yet the person who asked for the healing can cling to the problem.
There's a lady that touches Jesus, and then she's healed. She just touches his robe. Now, Robert talks of a statue with a saint underneath it, and everyone goes there to the statue and they get healing. And they do this for 10 years, and they go, okay, now we're going to move the statue over here. And they move the statue, and there's never even a saint underneath the statue. People were just going to and the consciousness was just consciousness. It wasn't even the consciousness of the saint. And people were healing themselves. Well, I don't know. They were being lifted into the higher level of consciousness, believing.
Well, there's also metaphysics as well as spiritual healing. There's also mind healing,
Okay.
I mean, matter is mind personified. So voodoo is mental healing, or destroying. And there's metaphysics. That's what metaphysics is all about. Is power of mind over matter, and mind will change matter. You can kill plants or make plants healthy by your attitude towards them. And voodoo is just metaphysics. So there's metaphysics too. And when people get together and really pray for somebody and they have a miraculous healing, it's because enough people believe there's going to be a healing and out pictures, But it's not the same as a spiritual healing, because if you had 20 people who were praying for a healing and 20 more people who were praying for a death, then there's a push, right? And if you have one person while all this is going on knowing the truth, then the truth out pictures, because that's and the client has turned themselves over and asked for the healing, then the 20 don't matter, 10,000 die on my left and 10,000 die on my right, or whatever that quote is.
That's kind of like what I was saying is the person that wrote the letter to Joel, they were in his consciousness. Just by sending the letter.
That's right.
That was the healing was
that they reached out to his consciousness.
Right.
They didn't need to send a letter.
Right. It's just the action. It doesn't matter what the action was.
They didn't even need to send a telegram, although they probably needed to, because they needed to have a physical activity associated with it to buy it.
Well, the people who were sick, and they were sick enough to believe that they needed to be healed, what would keep them from having a thought and then getting sick again?
Nothing. Nothing at all.
Was there? Okay.
And lots of people that get well get sick again.
I mean, it's certainly been that way on my spiritual trip.
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all. In fact, that's the real carrot, is after they get healed 3 or 4 times by Joel, that's when they start asking, what's going on here? How do I start doing this?
Right.
That's where the carrot is. But no, nothing at all. People that get healed get sick again. It's a business. It used to, back in the Christian Science, it was a business. Your healing was a profession. You had office hours and fees, and healing is a profession.
Because no one went back to the leper and the blind man, later, years after Jesus was around, to check, if they had their own consciousness of the truth, or if they were blind again, or had the leprosy better.
So pick up your mattress and walk, and the guy took up, and they folded another mile. Who the hell knows?
Did Joel ever heal the blind?
I don't know what he healed. What do we care? Who cares?
Well,
I don't know who he healed.
I'm just curious if there were.
He healed 135 people a day for 12 12 years, so he probably got a blind person or two. He corrected breech babies, turned them over inside of wombs. He solved babies that were born with withered arms. He produced full arms on babies that were born with withered arms. So I expect he probably threw in a pair of eyes here and there, but he couldn't fix glasses and he couldn't fix Barbara Ball's daughter's teeth.
No, it's not
Told her to take her to the dentist.
Jesus is the only person in the Bible that healed blind, so I was just curious if
I have no idea whether Joel ever, but it doesn't matter.
I've never
We're
heard.
talking about Joel. I don't have any experience with Joel.
Oh, okay.
Well, we know Robert healed constipation, man.
Yeah, we know that too, but that was also at a different spiritual level.
Spiritual constitution.
In Thunder of Silence, Joel talks about really moving to this place of non-power.
Mm-hmm.
And like where in this hierarchy that you've presented does that level, or
Well, if you're
is that pure awareness, or
no. If you're in spiritual adult, then your life is completely by grace and without exerting any power. And Joel would say that his healing did not require power. Sometimes it required discipline. But Joel had no power to apply. So just even at the level of living in spiritual adult, you become the non-doer, the effortless living by grace, making no choices type thing. And that's, from there, it doesn't need to change or anything, but from there, it just gets quiet. And when it's completely quiet, then what was always there becomes obvious. And that's what we call enlightenment. Noticing what you always were, noticing what was always there, The water finally gets still enough that you can see the reflection of the moon instead of all those funny, bumpy things of life.
When I was listening to the tape where he was talking about God's grace is my sufficiency, if you need an aspirin, or if you don't need any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talked about, but if you're not completely there, go the other way and take the aspirin and come back when you're ready, kind of
Sure.
thing.
Mm-hmm. I tell people that a lot, if you're not getting an immediate result by doing the spiritual work and you're concerned about your child, let's say, take it to a doctor, give him an aspirin. There's no merit badges for successful spiritual healing.
Physician heal itself.
Yeah.
there's like a receptivity thing there?
Yeah, and there's other things going on too. I have not seen a doctor in 20 years, 15 years, and I don't catch anything, and I don't have any disease or anything like that at all, and I don't worry about it, and I don't do anything, and I get a headache about every month or so, and I've dealt with it spiritually. What I've done is work on it for a day and a half with the headache. Or I can take a couple aspirin and it goes away in a day and a half, So I usually just don't even worry about it and take the aspirin, and this is my, so what? So, I still get headaches once in a while. I used to have migraines. I don't get migraines. I don't get incapacitated, but I get this tiny little headache that's just the remnant of the migraine because I get it at this spot down here, at the bottom of the skull underneath, and I get it up here. Two little points, and there used to be a spike that went between them. And that's not there, but the little points are there. And they're uncomfortable, and if they're uncomfortable, and then they don't get straightened out in 3 or 4 hours, I take an aspirin. So I haven't answered that yet. Oh well, and I don't care if I ever do. Probably like Joel with the glasses, It's good. Who cares? It's like God invented aspirin. But that's, that's the only infirmity that I ever have, it seems like. And it doesn't, I would have no idea how to fix that. Nothing else happens. What would I do? What should I change? I have no idea. How would I address that issue?
How about a human question?
Mm-hmm.
I used to sponsor a lot of people. When I had 5 people a week asking me to sponsor. And they came out here and messed it. But, because I have this look and everyone thinks that I'm like this playboy player, going to the nightclub and doing all this stuff. But I speak with a lot of homeless and mentally ill people. A lot of people that are appearing in my life in the past year and a half, it seems like or even if they sit by me in a meeting, it seems like they're sitting by me. But then I'm thinking, ooh, I'm the mighty healer. Someone come sit by Shannon, you will be healed. So that thought is a little I thought, apparently.
And it prevents healing.
Right.
Chances are, because I know you do a great deal of meditation work and such like, chances are they recognize the consciousness that you truly have. And like I said, they come to you to get their I recognized. But when they do that, your ego jumps back in once in a while.
Not once in a while.
Yeah.
Okay, so
there's a temptation to think I can heal. So ask who thinks that.
That's the false belief.
Yeah, so ask who thinks that.
Okay.
You can immediately go for the throat of that, Who thinks he can heal? Just do the self-inquiry. Just ask who thinks he can heal. And it'll just shut that guy down just like that. Nobody's going to raise their hand and answer, trust me.
Well, because you were saying something earlier today, and I actually shared it in the meeting, is I look at people on how perfect of a program, and when I look at everyone in the room, and I see them going straight to God, and when I picture the whole room like that, I'm in the moment.
Yeah, you bet. That's what we're talking about.
But I get in the moment by doing that. I don't get it by first me trying to do it and then seeing them. So that's just my experience.
No, I see everybody doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing and doing it perfectly. All of them. In the morning meeting, especially. It's great to watch it, And everybody's just doing their part perfectly, and it's just very clear to me the whole time. And I just sit there with a little bit of a buzz, I get so high, I'm just sitting there with a buzz, and you see me giggle for no reason, it's just so ludicrously funny and joyful looking at these people, just being perfect.
They only do, huh?
And doing the best they can, and there's just absolutely nothing wrong, and you go into this gymnasium, and you go down to Gold's Gym, and you see some people curling 5 pounds, and you see some guys curling 150, and they're all perfect, right? The guy's curling 5 because that's what he can curl. The guy's curling 150 because he can curl 150 now. It's all perfect. It's not that this guy's wrong and this guy's right, or this guy's showing off. It's just everybody's on the right here doing the best they can. I keep telling people there that, I come in there and I sit down and I see myself crossing the zoo and going into the monkey cage and sitting down in the center of it. And I just watch the monkeys around me and I notice that I'm absolutely comfortable sitting right there in the center of the cage. It's the right cage. Sitting in the middle of the monkey cage is exactly where I should sit, because this is one of the monkeys. So I sit in the monkey cage and I watch all the monkeys being perfect monkeys. And I'm also aware that if we get out of the cage, we're still in the zoo, and that's fine too. And I just find it very joyful watching that whole thing. There's nothing wrong there at all. Except when they do showing, then that's not right. But other than that, there's nothing ever wrong.
Actually, that was the best day of my life because you appeared that day. You're my teacher.
It's a hell of a script event. Thanks for coming. I love you all.
Thank you.